just it will ask you all, of course, to accept the recording. So appreciate if you could do that. And first of all, thanks for joining us today. My name is Lindsay Fenning. I'm the Director of Operations with Stivers. I've been with the organization for about 20 years. And if you are familiar with Stivers, then you know we are a nationwide recruiting firm. And we specialize in professional office and retail merchandising, staffing and recruiting. So without further ado, we're going to talk a little bit about the perfect resume in 20 minutes. The goal today is just really to talk about how to get the interview and get yourself in front of the right people and to land your dream job. So a resume really should tell your story. And a good resume, just like with any good story, you have to, of course, know your audience and make sure that your story is going to be one that they want to hear or read, as it were, in this case. And this is where we enter the recruiter. So your audience is most often a recruiter or hiring manager, and they're typically juggling a pretty heavy workload. They're trying to find the perfect employee for 10 to 15 different positions, different hiring managers, different teams and departments. And what we need to talk about is how you can make sure that your resume is quickly and easily identifiable as one that goes into the yes file and gets passed along to that next stage. So that's a little bit about what we're going to discuss today. First, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts, and that's really just simple tips on how to organize and format your resume to ensure that attention is going to where you want it on your resume. We're also going to talk a little bit about less is more. Simplification on a resume is critical. This is how we can emphasize the right things to create interest. And today, more than at any other time in history, it is so important that you customize your resume for every job that you apply to. And that seems like a daunting task, but it's not. And we're going to talk about a few simple ways to do that today. And then last but not least, walk through really the anatomy of a resume so that you can really understand how you use that resume to tell your story. If you do have any questions throughout, feel free to raise your hand or to throw them in the chat, and we can address those in the Q&A session at the end. So first on our resume do's and don'ts. So functional versus a chronological resume. You may have heard those terms or you may not have, but we really recommend that instead of using a functional resume format, you use one that's chronological. So what does that mean? A functional resume looks a little bit like this, where you have a very big area talking about your skills and just a small area including your work history and experience. What it does is it actually separates those two, and that's a little bit harder for recruiters and hiring managers to get a clear picture of where you gained what experience. And that's really what they're looking to do when they look at your resume. So instead of that functional resume, we recommend the chronological. So that's where you have the bigger section that walks backward through your work history. So it's going to go through each of your positions, starting with the most recent. And that's really the first way that you can start to tell your story, because it's going to highlight what you did at each of your positions. And, as we take that walk backward through time, we can really see, where you've grown and where you've advanced in your career. So you get one very big do here at the top, which is always use a formatting checklist. So we're going to give you ours. Whenever you submit a resume to any position, whether that is directly through email, through Indeed, through any company's website, it is really important that you go through this checklist to make sure that everything is in order before you send it, because you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So first up in the do's area is using sections. So what you saw illustrated on that last slide, a section for your contact information, then your intro or summary, and then your work history and experience, and then also education and skills sections. It's really important that they're separated out so it's easy for the recruiter or hiring manager to identify what they're looking at quickly and find the areas that are most important to them. On that same topic, there are times where we see references included on a resume, and we actually recommend that you don't do that. It'll lengthen your resume a little bit, and while it's rare, I have heard instances of companies calling a reference before they've even talked to someone about the job. So, of course, it's really important that your references are being contacted about positions that you're truly interested in and in consideration for. So that's why we recommend bringing those references to the interview and not including those on the resume when you submit it. Next up on our do's and don'ts is your font and font size. So I love, creative fonts. I have a real interest in graphic design. You can see I kind of like, icons and things of that nature. But on a resume, that is sometimes hard for a recruiter to digest. They want something that's very clean, simple, and consistent. And they also need it to be readable. So that's where that 10 to 12 size font comes in. I have gotten some resumes over the years that people are trying to fit it on one page. And so they're packing in as much as they can. And it's a size 7 or 8 font. I've got to get the magnifying glass and scroll in on my screen to be able to read it. If you're between 10 and 12, that's usually easy to read on the screen. And if it's more than 12, then it looks like you're just trying to fill space, which we certainly don't want to do that. Using bold or underline or italics, that's great if you're using that in your font to call attention to certain things. On the don't side, grammar and spelling. So this is a big thing. When we put our resume into Indeed, it doesn't have the same grammar check functions that a Microsoft Word or a Google Doc would. So, both are equally as important to make sure that there aren't any grammar or spelling mistakes. And one that I want to call out specifically is capitalization. We all text so much today, and we tend to not capitalize things when we're communicating via text. Well, this is a professional representation of you. So you want to make sure that capitalization is used where it should be, and really punctuation as well. You probably have heard action verbs tied to a resume. Including action verbs with each of the bullets describing your duties is so important to show really, what you did, what your responsibilities were. But the thing that tends to hang us up is using the correct tense. And I hear this all the time from recruiters and hiring managers. If you're still working somewhere, the action verb should be in the present tense. But if you're talking about a past position, they should be in the past tense. And we forget to update that a lot. We change our resume, we add a new position, but we forget to update the last one to past tense. It's a red flag for recruiters. So pay special attention to that and make sure it's consistent. Avoid using anything that is, an abbreviation or a slang when you're describing what you have done with the company. Again, professional representation, and it might be something that the reader doesn't understand. Another thing to avoid is something that is really specific to your company. So if you have an abbreviation or a phrase that you use internally, that might not be something that a recruiter understands what it is. And I think a good rule of thumb for that is if you didn't know what it meant when you started the job, don't put it on your resume. So we talked a little bit about length, but keeping the length to 1 to 2 pages. A good rule of thumb here is 1 page is wonderful if you can do that. But if you've had 10 plus years of work history, then, bumping that up to 2 pages is certainly not as much of a challenge today as it used to be. We're getting everything electronically today, so it's not difficult to go beyond 1 page and still get that information in a readable format to a recruiter. But if we get to the end of 2 pages and on to 3 and 4, the reality is that's a lot of information, and a recruiter's probably not going to read past the first and second page as it is. So definitely, keep your resume to that 1 to 2 pages. Something that can help with that is your margins. Make sure that they're not any larger than 1 inch on any side. So sides, top, bottom, because that's going to push you onto longer pages. On the opposite side of that coin, don't use less than a 1/2 inch because I've also seen some resumes where the writing goes off the edge of the page or off the screen when I'm looking at it. And that makes it really tough to read. So stick within that 1/2 and 1 inch margin. space. All right, so last up in our do's and don'ts section is probably the most important of all. So when we receive a resume, we always want to be able to get the critical information quickly. When we get a resume that's written in a paragraph form, it's a lot harder to pick that out. So we always recommend using bullets when you're describing your job duties in your position. So with a paragraph, it kind of buries the keywords and the important details. It takes us a little bit longer to read through all of that and really digest and make sure that it's saying what we want it to say. It's a little bit too much information, honestly, for a resume. That's more in line with the interview. And it also makes your resume longer in general. So if you stick with the bullet recommendation, that's really going to ensure that it's easy to read your resume and that a recruiter or a hiring manager is going to be able to, very quickly see what you want them to. So anything that you're emphasizing with those bullets, they're going to see that easily and quickly. And it also allows us to customize that resume. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the customization section, but when you use a bullet, it's really easy to do. Less is more. Your resume is going to be your introduction and your summary. We certainly know that you are much more than what is on the page of your resume. So we don't have to share everything about us on our resume. This is where we want to make sure that we hit the highlights. Each position that you're talking about, use anywhere from 3 to 6 bullets to describe what you did there. We all have a tendency to want to talk about everything that we did in our position on our resume. And the reality is that's what we can do in an interview, but this is just to get your resume noticed. So you want to pick out the most important things that you did in that job and the things that you want to highlight and just include those 3 to 6 bullets. So again, we're going to talk about customizing, but when we just use 3, 4, or 5 bullets, it's really easy for us to swap 1 or 2 bullets out when we apply to a specific job based upon what that company is looking for. So you can have a resume file at home that has all of the bullets that you might use, but when then you actually go to apply for a position, just use 3 to 6 of them for each position that are most closely related to the job that you're applying for. It's a great way to hone in on why you're a good match for that job quickly, and the recruiters will see that and appreciate it. It's common practice for us. We talk about it a lot, that is what we're looking for, and that's what we ask our candidates to do. So when you do that preemptively before we even talk to you, that is always something that's going to get you noticed. Continuing kind of on this simplification path, those bullets should not be a paragraph. They should not be a run-on sentence. They should be 1 or 2 lines of information about your duties. Side note, when you use bullets, you don't have to use a period. You don't have to use punctuation because it's a bulleted list. This is another place to talk about, what the content of those bullets are. We already talked about company specific, but if you're applying for a job that's in a different industry than what you've worked in, make sure that you also avoid industry specific terminology. So an example of this is if you used a specific software for your organization and it was only used in that industry, using the name of that software on your resume is not going to tell someone from a different industry much about you. But if you talk about the type of software it was, for example, instead of saying Salesforce, say I used a CRM software, then that is something that no matter what industry you're in, it's going to be relevant. So avoid those industry specific terms unless you're applying for a job in your same industry and it's common knowledge, then of course that's something that you can certainly include. And last but not least, the resume, again, it is the summary. This is where you're creating interest, and then you give them the full story when you get in front of them for the interview. So focus on simplifying and streamlining your resume. So I've teased the customization piece a lot. And if this is the first time that you're hearing this, I think this is probably the most important thing that we're going to talk about today, truthfully. So when you apply for a position, whether it's on your screen or mentally, what you really want to do is lay the job description and your resume side by side, and you want to draw the parallels. It's like a kindergarten matching game. If there's a requirement listed on the job description, there should be a bullet on your resume that matches to that. So we're going to walk through and illustrate one example of that here, just to make sure that it's clearly and understandably presented. So on the left, you can see all I have here is just customer service representative requirements. So we didn't get into the meat of the job description. We just hit that part that's really critical when it comes to your presentation in your application. On the right-hand side, we can see that we have the resume. So we're applying for a customer service position, and that's what our work history shows. We've been there for 2 years as a customer service representative. So our job description says we need a year of previous customer service experience. So on our resume, it does state that that is our title, but we don't want to assume. We always want to make sure that we spell that out. So we're going to include a bullet that talks about the service that we provided and how we provided it. So if it was phone, chat, or email, all of the above, one of the above, that's important information to include here. You can see we also used our action verb, and this is a short, sweet bullet that tells us, hey, I've got the experience that you're looking for. So next on their description is a high technical aptitude. So again, here's where we can highlight what we've done, and we can remove the company and industry specifics, and we can just talk generally about it. Navigated multiple systems to resolve customer issues, research discrepancies, and document outcomes. So again, we're using our action verbs here. So past tense and multiple systems to resolve customer issues, research discrepancies, and document outcomes. So all of these power verbs here, these action words are showing what we did, and it's showing our ability to navigate multiple systems and our strong technical aptitude. Last on the requirement list was the ability to work in a metric-driven environment. So for any of those who have worked in one, you know what this means, but the way that we can correspond what we have done in our company's specific goals to this general statement is just to talk about the fact that we always exceeded our goals. So we did that consistently. And if you want to highlight something that you did really well, this is a great opportunity to do that. So here, including achieving a customer satisfaction score of 95%. So when it comes to applying for a specific position, really drawing those parallels from what the company is asking for to what you did is so important. It is very often that when we conduct an interview with a candidate, we go through what the job is requiring, and they tell us, oh, I did that here and I did that here, but the resume doesn't show that. So if your resume doesn't highlight it, it's probably not going to get you to that next step of an interview. And that's the goal. That's the goal of the resume. All right, so the last piece of this, and I know we're bumping up against almost our 20-minute mark here, guys, so I want to give you a little time for questions, but just kind of walking through the anatomy of that resume we saw on the first screen. So this format in studies have been done to identify the best resume format. This is it. So there are many people smarter than I that study how people review websites and read documents, and the common accepted outcome of that is that we read in either an E or an F pattern. So what does that mean? We start up at the top left, and then we either read in the shape of an E, so over, down, and over, or the shape of an F, over, down, down. So when you have a resume that is formatted with contact info, education, things on the left-hand side, and then your work history on the right, that actually loses our attention faster. So it doesn't keep our attention. It doesn't keep our focus. That is just the way that our brains work. It's really interesting research that's out there. And again, this format is the most simple, straightforward, and highly recommended format across the board. So as we dissect this, there's going to be that segment for contact information. That's a no-brainer. But the one thing I do want to point out is email addresses. We get a lot of applications from people who have an email address that maybe has kind of a funny saying or a nickname. And that's fine if you have that for your personal use, but it's also free to get a Gmail account and use just your first name or last name, some kind of combination of, so that it is specific to your job search and it couldn't be taken the wrong way. So professional email address, if you're not sure if yours is, just create a new one with your name. Can't recommend that enough. The next segment is that intro or summary area. And this is your chance to frame the big picture. So this is kind of the summary of you as a person before you get into the details of what you did in your work history and experience. So that's setting the tone for the story that you're telling. And then that work history and experience. So this is where a recruiter is going to spend his or her time. They want to look at what you did above all else. So this is your chance to show your career progression, how you've grown, how you've advanced, how you've changed throughout your career. And this particular piece, right here, is the most important section of your resume. This is where we spend the most time, those 3 to 6 bullets for each job, and this is where we match it up to the job description. So spend a good amount of your time here honing your work history and experience section. One thing that is really attractive to hiring managers and recruiters is when you can call out tangible accomplishments at your positions. We call those made, saved, achieves. So it's where you made something for your company, where you saved your company something, or where you achieved something. So it's really how your company is better for you having been there. And we all know that there's a lot of those out there, but we don't always think to include those on our resume. So if you have something that you can put a number on, you made or created a process, or in this case, on this resume here, it's actually talking about making a certain amount of revenue. Or if you saved your company money or saved time in a process or achieved employee of the month or meeting those metrics, this is where you want to highlight those as well. Definitely include those in your bullets. And last but not least, the education and skills section. This is what we like to call our keyword section. So there's a lot of technology out there that scans resumes. Even if a recruiter or hiring manager is looking at your resume and determining whether you're qualified or not, it is very likely that your resume is going into an applicant tracking system. And, what does that mean for you? Well, even if you're not qualified for the job you applied for today, now they have your information. And if you include important keywords here, your education and your skills that they might look for a different position, they're going to be that much more likely to find your resume if the right job for you opens up tomorrow. So it is really important that if there are keywords that you didn't include here in your work history, you get them down here at the bottom of that resume with your skills and your experience. All right, so I know we went just a little bit over 20 minutes. Thanks for hanging in there, but wanted to give you guys a chance. Does anyone have any questions? Anything that I can answer about formatting your resume, content, or anything specific to your resume? Okay. Well, we are going to actually be sending out this recording after today's call, and our contact information will be included as well. So if you think of any questions after that, please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to have the opportunity to help you with your career search, whether that is some resume tips or, actually representing you and introducing you to employers in that office, professional, or retail merchandising space. And thank you all for your time today. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Stivers if we can help you on any front.